I'm Susan Gardner from Municipal World. We're here at the Ontario Municipal Administrators Association Conference in beautiful Muskoka, Ontario. And joining me in our media center is Patrick Goff from the municipality of Wheat Ridge, Colorado.
Correct.
You're here today chatting to administrators about the experience with cannabis legalization in Colorado, which happened in 2012.
Correct.
And what has that experience been? What was the early experience? What have you seen since then?
Yeah, it's been very interesting. And actually in Colorado, the medical portion started in 2000, so there wasn't really much impact from that on a municipal level. But yes, in 2012, voters approved recreational use. So we kind of had to scramble and figure out what to do. Our city council decided to allow it in our community. In Colorado, you can opt out. You don't have to allow the marijuana industry in your community. Ours did. So it's been a huge learning curve. I think a lot of ordinances, code. We had to change a lot of codes and laws to meet the new demands of the industry and regulate it appropriately. Our state, Colorado, had kind of a foundation law in place, but we could, as a municipality, we could make it even stricter if we wanted to, which we did, so that it wasn't, maybe impactful on certain sensitive land uses in our community. So, for example, our city council adopted a 1,000-foot buffer around schools, daycare centers, so that this use is not adjacent to those types of sensitive land uses. Because even though it's illegal in Colorado, not everybody likes it.
Okay. So what were some of the hiccups in the early days following legalization?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest hiccups for us probably was our city council. They had the option of asking our local voters in Wheat Ridge if they wanted to opt in or not. And they did not go down that route. They just made the decision themselves as a city council to allow it.
So no public consultation,
no
taking the pulse of the voters.
No,
on
exactly. And I think I looked at what the Wheat Ridge vote was for the statewide constitutional vote, and it was a majority of Wheat Ridge, slight majority. I think it was just over 50% of Wheat Ridge residents had voted yes on the statewide ballot question. But yeah, city council could have had more community dialogue maybe about it with the community to see if they wanted to actually make it legal in Wheat Ridge. They didn't do that. They unilaterally put it forward. There were still some public meetings to adopt the law, but I don't think our citizens were aware. And then when they became aware of the issue several years later, they were pretty upset. I think it kind of impacted the trust that our citizens had with our government for a while. So I think that was probably one big hiccup we went through.
Talked about issues around edibles and what
Yes.
that experience was like in the early days too.
Yes.
Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So Colorado, as part of the legalization of recreational marijuana, there's 4 different license types, and one is just the retail component where you can sell cannabis, but then there's also what's called marijuana infused products. So a lot of people call them edibles, or a MIP is the name of the industry, marijuana infused products. And the state didn't regulate the manufacture of those products very well at the beginning, so the dosages in the edibles was not regulated or controlled or measured. So unfortunately, we actually had, not necessarily in Wheat Ridge, but in our state, we had folks who died overdosed because they ate too much. They got too much THC in their system, and it killed them. So the state has really clamped down on that now. Edibles are controlled and measured and regulated very heavily. They have to be sold in individual packaging that explains what the dosages are and the serving sizes, so the consumer knows.
Yeah, so there's a big education component
Yes.
that kind of goes along
Yes,
with this to
definitely.
make sure people or safe, right?
Yeah, and making sure the edibles aren't getting in. A lot of times it looks like candy potentially, and you don't want kids getting into it. And unfortunately, we had a lot of instances where animals got into the product too, because folks were not careful enough on where they stored it, and animals have gotten into it and died also.
Okay, so one of the fears as Canada's gone into this phase just very recently, within the last week, was that there would once this was legalized, there would be Reefer Madness and some significant sociological changes.
Sure.
Did your community experience anything like that?
Yeah, it's funny. It seems like it's been years ago already since it became legalized in Colorado, and I was watching for October 17th in Canada, and I have some family in St. John's, Newfoundland, and I saw that was one of the first places where it became legal because of the time zone,
Yes.
right? And the lines were very long, and I heard they ran out. Didn't seem like anybody got out of control, I don't think.
No.
But I don't remember any, besides the long lines and just the kind of the exuberant, I think excitement from people who were excited about it. Denver, not in our community in Wheat Ridge, but in Denver, which is just next door, they had some issues originally with some large festivals that were associated with marijuana and cannabis on April 20th, which is the
420.
420, and so they would always, folks would get together and kind of take over some parks and have a 420 festival, and so they've kind of clamped down on that a little bit too. But, besides the issues with the edibles, I don't, there really hasn't been, any strange incidences or major surprises that,
That'll be reassuring.
Yeah.
Canada,
The world
I'm sure.
didn't end. People are still going to work, and so nothing really.
So, in your experience, do you have any advice that you might offer to communities that are now, thinking about what the future looks like for the next little bit, and as we kind of catch our stride with the whole new context?
Sure. Yeah. I think take your time and investigate the situation, talk to the community, figure out what the community wants. I know in Canada and Ontario it may be a little bit different on how much control the provincial government has over the municipalities. In Colorado, fortunately, as a municipality, we have a lot of control over the regulation, the zoning, the licensing. So I'd say take your time, investigate it, figure out if you're going to allow it in the community, figure out how much of an industry do you want in your community? Do you want to cap it if that's allowed in Canada? I don't know if it is. If it's not, maybe lobby your provincial government to see if you can provide more controls at the local level, because it's really going to have the impacts locally on your residents and citizens. So I think you think your local governments would be able to have a little bit more control over it.
Yeah. So having some of that dialogue and making those decisions kind of collaboratively.
Yeah, just
in
be
the
open
community.
and transparent, I think, about
Yeah.
it, and communicate with your community, saying this is what we're doing. Get their feedback, and just be as open as possible about it.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you so much for coming
You're
in
welcome.
and chatting. We really appreciate that.
You're welcome. It's glad to be here.
Thank you. I'm Susan Gardner for Municipal World. We share your stories.